I think I mentioned before, we have some people are having issues with Cable Extra and a few other ones because of permissions. Like I said, go to my website, find my email, go into there to remind me, and I'll try to do some searches to see if I can figure out what it is. It's basically a permissions issue. Sometimes, you know, Windows doesn't see you as the administrator, even if it is your computer, and you have to tell it, yes, I am the administrator. Let me do what I want. So we're going to try to fix that, hopefully. But if there's any other issues and you haven't mentioned it here, make sure you do email me so we can try to get it all working in a good way tomorrow. Okay, so from this particular code, basically, I was just trying to give you an idea of how to go about putting the data set in, subsetting it, going about making whatever varied changes you need to it before you actually go about the estimation. Because remember, the whole purpose of the first part of the data, getting everything in, is to basically have it nice and neat. So when you run your regression, what you're wanting to actually put in your equation and who you want in the equation in terms of countries or whatever is there. So this is usually where we're doing this sort of modification of the data, manipulation, however you want to call it. So we're going to do the random sampling. Should have been very similar to what we were doing earlier. Let me just grab it here. You just go down to the and remember I told you there's some parts I'm not putting in the slides. This is those parts. This was the part I will include, don't worry. Okay. I just have to uncomment them. Okay, so one of the things that, because we're doing the piping and everything, we do need is going to be the DP-LYR, as well as the reader. Basically allows us to bring in the data set. From this, since I've already done that, we don't really need those right now. But remember how we did it before, that basically we have the ACLA data. I didn't really tell you to select these. I don't remember doing that. But if you did, that's fine. And then basically it's that sample underscore N10. If I did 100, if I did 1,000, it would bring in a random sample for that particular data. If I remember, sample N does not do replacement. So basically it should just be a sample with no replacement. But I might need to check that. So if we run that, hold on, I gotta figure out what the conflict is on that thing. Hold on. What am I doing here? Okay, hold on a second. So like everyone else usually has a problem, you need to figure out what the problem is. Let's see. Okay, apparently I was using event date, but that's not a part of the name, so I'm going to replace event date with active year. Hopefully that'll fix. See if that's the rest of them. Nope, I don't know what else I got in there. Okay, I'll just replace that with type violence, I guess. Okay, so in that case, basically, I was able to sample those particular 10, and in that case, yours is not going to match mine, by the way, no matter if you type this in exactly. Mainly because when it does a sample, it's using a random seed. In that case, because I didn't set it, it's basically going to use my clock to create it. So just because yours doesn't look exactly like this, that's fine. Okay? But whatever it is, it's a random of 10. Yeah, so basically, once you have that, you could display the data without trying to use cable or anything else. And then basically on the China, Philippines one, basically you need to go through and find those particular countries. Now, I know what they are, but you could also do a search in there and find them. Okay? We're not really going to show that today. I can do that tomorrow, but basically you can, when I say that this basically takes whatever the information is and then puts a function on it, that includes substring functions. If I know roughly what the letters are, if I know CHINA, and I could tell it lowercase or uppercase, it could basically find that information for me within the data set and keep only those observations. So, but just to keep it easy and to keep it, compact right now, I'm just putting it in this way. Okay, so like I said, it's not one of those things where you would have to go and find it. You could actually, you could tell them to search for those particular characters or letters, and they would find it for you. I gotta stop doing that. Okay. So from that, basically, I built a data set that you could either look at it this way, or you could over here to this to see it in the data frame version. Okay? The few things I asked you to do is basically create a subset in terms of 2000, 2010, and then also aggregate over region year to look at each region's total number of conflicts for each of those periods. Okay, so again, I already know that I have a conflict within mine. Actually, let me do, oh no, I'll just do it this way. Well, group by shouldn't be a problem. Should just be this one. Yeah. So if I look at that data set now, conflict by region, this one, then I get basically Africa 2000, I get an observation for it, 1,162, 2010 was 863, Americas was grouped together, 415 and 384, and so forth, all the way down. So this is what I mean by, it's the subsetting. Typically, you would this type of information you would use as descriptors whenever you're trying to outline the question or the information you're trying to go through, you're not wanting to show them all that information. But if your question is dealing with, conflict type outcomes, but by region, seeing which ones are fluctuating more, do we see growth in some, versus others? This is where this sort of subsetting, and then this would be very easy to then plug into a graph. So that's why typically you wouldn't do this for some type of regression. Usually it's for visual or tables that allow you to then, express, or somehow show the question that you're, sorry, it's been a long day, you're trying for your research, basically, or to help push along the arguments that you're making for your research. That's probably a better way. The last was I had already went through and did the search for the FDI data. Okay, basically all I did was I went in there, did the WDI search, asked it to look for FDI, and then I chose to use in this case. Which one was this? This was inward, FDI inflows, if I remember right. In this case, I wanted for all countries, and I told it the time frame that I wanted it for. I could have specified years. I could say, these are the particular years I want. Or if I left out the start and the end, it'll download the entire database for that, okay? Then you could basically go through and select and throw out everything that's not within the time frame that you want. So it's just that if you do it the other way, where it downloads everything, you will be here for probably 5 minutes to get it all in. Okay, depends how fast the network is at the time. But basically, we go through. And in this case, the only thing I was doing here is I was trying to rename the columns because, who wants to type in bx.klt, all that stuff for their regressions? Do it something that's memorable so that you know how to type it in, which in this case, FDI inflows. Hold on, what did I do wrong? Let me see. Yeah. Maybe I should have done this ahead of time. There it goes. Okay, and then I just need to modify the column names. Okay, so if I look at this particular data set now, FDI, you're going to see instead of it still has a label there, but in this case, the name FDI underscore inflows basically is a lot easier to know about. So we can basically download it, but at the same time, we could actually pipe it in and change the name so it's not something that seems odd. Okay, we can make changes as we go along. And then the last part of this was basically a merge. So this should have been the exact same as what we had with the FDI, or sorry, the GDP outcomes. In this case, did I switch the names yet? Yeah, I'm using ISO 3C. Yeah. So basically, I'm going to do a left join. In this case, I'm going to take the ACLID, which I told you probably you didn't want to do. Usually, like I said, you take the full, more complete data set and usually try to merge into it. I'm actually doing it backwards here, and I'm actually going to do ACLID. I want to bring the FDI into the ACLID. Since this is just an example, it's not as important probably, but it should still do what I want it to do. Let me see. Hold on. Yeah, this is before I changed the name. Give me a second. Just make sure I got the right one. Okay, that should be right. Oh, there's something else. So that's what I mean by the fact that my code might not run all the way through because there will be mistakes in places. Okay. Why didn't you print anything? Okay, so there it goes. So you can see even the code that I was using, because I'm doing the way the slides are designed, sometimes they don't repeat, or some of the stuff isn't actually, it's commented out. I had to actually make adjustments. This is what I mean tonight. When I give you the code, it doesn't mean that everything in there is going to be perfect. You just can't run it and then say I'm done, because most likely it's not going to run perfectly. Okay, so that's why I don't feel bad about giving it to you. It's going to take some work on your side to get it kind of done. Okay, so like I said, this is roughly the slides to this point, but I do want to just mention some of these things after this, because again, like I said, these all they seem like just disjointed pieces right now. But whenever you're actually doing research, one of the big things that you need to do is to communicate what you're actually, how your data is structured, how you're talking about your results. Nice, clean tables do a great job at that. Copying and pasting things directly from whatever program you're using does not. Okay, so this is where one of the things that most people kind of fault on is that basically they think the information's there. How do I care how it looks? Well, the people that are actually reading it care, and it really tells you how hard they're actually going to read it if you're, or how serious they're going to be about it when they're reading it. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that the better you can do on that, usually, if nothing else, if you don't get accepted, that might be fine. Getting comments sometimes is better than actually getting accepted, because you can figure out faults of what you're doing. So in this case, just think about these tables as basically your lifeline to that reader, and trying to give the information that you found to the reader. Okay, so that's why, even though I'm not going to cover this in detail, it will be within the program that I'm going to give you tonight, so that you can sort of see how you can do a better job of producing these tables. So a lot of these are going to be it's going to be required are like the knitter package, cable, or stargazer. These are all packages that are basically put together to give you top quality type journal tables. Okay, so in this case, like I said, this isn't very, it's neat, nice and neat, that's fine. but you're usually not going to find this. It's usually going to be a little bit more formatted. But this is just basic, in a sense, okay? And all I've done gone through here is basically take all the regions, counts, and their means across different values, and then presented it. It's something you might see in a particular paper that you have. But again, you can do, you know, these are what you basically see in terms of descriptive statistics. Basically, the only thing I'm doing is I'm changing the arrangements a little bit or changing the country that I'm looking at. But the fact that I can do this and just basically list the data frame instead of just going back and going through and destroying my entire data, I can basically create another data frame that's only specific for a particular region. And then I can basically print out those statistics. Makes it a little bit easier because a lot of times whenever you're working with data and you want to create a table on the means, basically if you're using SATA, you collapse it. Once you collapse it, then basically you can create your table and then you have to uncollapse it to get it back to the way it was. By doing the data frames in each of these, you can basically create little subsets of your data to get your framework right for each of your tables. So one is using Stargazer and this one is using Cable. And but I guess because I don't use Cable enough, if the person who usually works with me on this particular class, his name is Steve, loves this. He can make it 10 times better than I can with Cable. But I prefer other programs like Stargazer or something else. But it's all about preference. Communicating the information is what you want in the best possible way. Now, when it comes to actual regression tables, the reason I point this out is because I've seen so many people put these numbers, typing them by hand, and then they go and put the nice stars there by hand. Then they go and put, this by hand. And sometimes they'll put in 32 for one and then 31 for the other, even though they just mistyped. Why do that? Basically, you can run your regression. We're not doing regressions yet, but this is the very simple, just OLS, just to give you an idea. But basically, because the information for each model is stored, then the only thing I have to do is tell it, print those models. And then I can tell it what style that I want. I use LaTeX. Oh, that's going to remind me. You're going to use my code. You're going to need to change LaTeX to text, because most likely you don't have LaTeX in your computers yet. If you do, you can use this. If you don't, you need to switch it to text, T-E-X-T, and it should still print. But I can also, not only that, what I've done here is I've actually changed the names to real names and not N_PB_ You usually want it to be a nice, something that you know exactly what it is. In this case, this is a data set on cars. So basically weight and horsepower, things like that. But you can do all that inside the table command. And then it prints the nice stars for you without you having to calculate whether it is significant or not. It does it for you. These are all the things that can kind of speed up and make it look so much better than what it was. Okay? That's why I kind of, even though we're running out of time, I just want to put that to, it's about presentation sometimes. Better presentation, better chance. Okay? In terms of visualization, that's one of the reasons why we switched to R. There are ways of copying this in other programs, but really R is some of the best when it comes to that. It's one of the strong advantages you get to it. And that's why, I do the ggplot too, but there are other packages that do similar type things. It's just, I like the ggplot because basically it has a huge community. If I have a problem, if something I can't figure out what's going on, usually I can find it by going just a simple Google search, okay? But there's a bunch that we can do in here, and that usually helps in terms of how, visually you might like something for some way, but somebody wants it to be, so most journals make you pay for colored graphs, things like that. You can do nice black and white outcomes that are very still very clear and readable using these programs. Okay, so just very simple things that come out in terms of the data that we've already been using. I mean, I can model the outcomes in terms of who is the bar. So Nigeria is the bar in terms of GDP per capita. The line is South Africa. 2 bits of information, both telling me, one is higher than the other, and one in absolute value, or in absolute terms, but in general, they have been going in the same direction. These are things that you can pull out of this. And we can make it nice and simple, or we can even add more clarity to it. In the sense that, now I know who it is because I marked them. I tell you where the source came from. I also grabbed one of the years of, what is this? This is 2010, and I actually calculated the difference. Everything was done in the same program. Okay? And it's just little tweaks on the code that allow you to then produce something that gives a little bit more information to the readers, because a lot of times when the readers are going through any type of article, we read, yes, we kind of skim in some cases, but a lot of times you'll see us flip to some of the tables and look at them to try to get some, glean some information from it. So a lot of times we need it to be very clear and understandable. And the same thing with the plots. I should be able to look at this and have at least a good impression about what it's about. Okay? So that's why that the ggplot or any of the other ones can actually help you. This is the same code. I'm just trying to show it to you. But since I'm going to give it the code tonight, it doesn't matter as much there. I could make it more complicated if I wanted to. I can also make this more clean as well, by the way. I could have easily done something that allowed me to do a shading in here. There's just so many options that are available to you to give, as much information, valuable information about whatever research you're looking at. And then if we wanted to go all out in some ways, you can actually make them a little bit more interactive. Let's see if it's going to let me do it. Yeah. So again, this is one that I created over there. Because I had to do it through HTML, I didn't want to spend a lot of time, but I can basically go to a dot and see who it is. So this is number of conflicts. Actually, I didn't put the ISO code, I just put the information. So the log of the number of conflicts is 3.6. So if you want to do the math on that, you can figure it out. Log of GDP is 9.19. But I could do this for any of the dots. Basically, it becomes interactive in a sense. So those web pages that sometimes you go to and the graphs are interactive, you can kind of do that stuff. You can do it with R as well. So if you're creating your website, you can basically create an interactive graph for whatever whatever your research question is, to give an idea. And you could easily upload this to any website and it would stay exactly the same. Very interactive, allowing you to get more information for what you're doing. Okay? And like I said, it's only a slight tweak of the code. I'm still using ggplot, I'm using all this, but I'm just asking it to use something called ggplotly. In that case, I'm just forcing it to be a little bit more interactive. Okay? The last, again, it's going to be one of those things you practice tonight. Of course, yeah, you're going to do your homework tonight. But that's fine. But in terms of the example I wanted to give you, so like I said, I don't have enough time to sort of go through this, but what I was hoping is you do practice this a little bit tonight. This is sort of the first step to going to something that allows you to you create your data, you create some nice graphs, and then you tell it to build an HTML file, which typically is one of the most simple ones that we don't need the extra LaTeX or Pandoc or any of those. Basically, it will produce an HTML file that can be opened in any Chrome, Microsoft Edge, or any of those. Once you do that, it looks like a document, and you can kind of scroll through it. And when you do that, it basically takes everything that you put in that RMD file and produces it and makes it readable just like any document. But you can think about if you're trying to give something to a supervisor, you don't want to show them a bunch of your code. You can actually run the file, print it out, and give it to them to kind of go through your data that you produce, the graphs you produce, comments or anything else. And from that, basically, they might get a better idea than trying to look at your code. You can do like very simple reports here on this. And that's exactly what I did with this EX HTML file. So when I produced it, again, I'm going to give you the code to later. It's going to be called ex_html.rmd. And when you do it, run it, if I can find my thing. Let's see here. It's going to look like exactly like this. Basically, I just made an example, your name, and I wrote a few sentences in there, put a link for, a course for R Markdown that allows you to see a lot better examples of this. But basically, I was able to go through the document. I told it to summarize. When it summarized, it basically created a little nice output that I could give to my supervisor, whoever I need to give it to. By going down, basically, we can see a few more things that are a little more interactive, a nice plot. I didn't try to make it creative or anything. I threw the first slide that I was doing in this just to show that, I could do it. But it also allows me to see, primary point and then the itemizations and then boldface, things like that. Then I can also show my code if I wanted to. It's very helpful for trying to give information, especially if it's summarized. This is just like sort of the basic. You could actually create your entire paper from there. And it would create a nice PDF, does the citations for you in terms of, placing them, putting them in the right format, depending on which style that you like. You can then jump from, a PDF. You can make it into a Word document. You could take my slides that are PDF and turn them into PowerPoint documents. You could take all this that I've just done and actually turn it into a website that they could scroll through all the slides and interact with them as well. So you can see that it becomes a lot, the more you know about it, the basically this, you can start to, in terms of being a little more efficient on how you're transforming from one document style to another. Because some journals like Word, some like PDFs, some you actually put your LaTeX files in there. Sometimes you want to upload a PowerPoint, but you only have it in PDF form. This is where that transition becomes a lot easier than doing a copy and paste or basically just going back and retyping everything. Okay, and basically the example should get you started for simple HTML. Once you start trying to go a little bit further, though, you will need some additional programs to download. And it sort of discusses those by telling you that you need, I think in the slides I tell you that you need Pandoc, you need LaTeX, or you need a few additional things. But you can see that it might become a lot more helpful. Even like, the website that I get y'all to go to. By the way, thank you for the clicks. When you go to that, actually I built that in RStudio. That's all it is. I built it there. I don't know any HTML coding. I told you, I don't know programming. But the conversion, the Pandoc helps me convert it into what I need. This is where, like I said, it becomes a lot more helpful. Okay? So some of this you'll be able to practice tonight, and then you can let me know how it goes. Please, if it goes badly, you know, be nice. But hopefully, if there's no problems with any of the other coding, then it should run pretty nicely. You should be able to get some good examples. Even from those examples, you should be able to play around a little bit. Try changing the colors of the graphs, doing a little bit better job than I did with cable, because trust me, it can do very nice tables. All that stuff is just a little bit of practice on your side. Okay? I should have it uploaded in about an hour, so it should be, I doubt you would look at it that quickly, but about then it should be there. So yeah, so sorry about going through it so quickly, but remember, we'll start in the beginning tomorrow morning, kind of going through it, especially if you have any trouble. Because like I said, it's never guaranteed that it's going to be perfect, especially you've already seen that I've built this 2 days ago. But because I decided to add a package at the last minute, it's causing issues with select and with names. So I need to figure out which package it is and kill it so that it basically doesn't mess up my other stuff. So just going through that. But if you do have I would like to speak about it tomorrow if we can. Just don't, you know, I mean, if you have trouble with it, make sure that you bring those up tomorrow. Okay?